You really think someone like you belongs here? The voice carried across the parking lot, thick with contempt, as 10 officers closed in on a woman they had already judged and already decided to break. What they did not realize, what none of them could see behind her quiet, unshaken gaze, was that the woman they were surrounding had spent months building the very trap they were now stepping into, piece by piece, waiting for this exact moment. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun stretched long golden lines across the asphalt of the Brookside Plaza parking lot, where shopping carts rattled faintly in the distance and the hum of idling engines blended into a steady, forgettable rhythm. Monica Hayes moved through it all at her own pace, unhurried, her steps deliberate beneath the weight of 2 grocery bags pressing into her palms. Her breathing was steady, controlled, the kind that came from someone who had long ago learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. To anyone watching, she looked ordinary, just another woman finishing errands at the end of a long day, her loose gray sweater catching the breeze, her hair pulled back in a simple tie, her posture relaxed but grounded. A stray receipt fluttered loose from one of her bags, skimming across the pavement before catching against a faded parking stripe. Monica noticed it, paused, and bent slightly to pick it up, her movements careful, precise, as though every action had been measured before it was made. That was when the first cruiser rolled in. It did not rush. It did not need to. The vehicle glided slowly between rows of parked cars, its presence subtle but deliberate, like something testing the edges of a situation before committing. Inside, Sergeant Daniel Crowley watched through the windshield, his fingers tapping once against the steering wheel, his eyes narrowing in a way that suggested irritation more than concern. He had seen thousands of faces in his years on the force, and yet something about Monica's calmness bothered him. Not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she was not reacting at all. A second cruiser followed, then a third. Engines idled low as doors opened one by one, boots meeting asphalt with a dull synchronized thud. Officers spread out without needing instruction, forming a loose perimeter that tightened with each passing second. The casual shoppers nearby slowed their steps, their conversations dipping into uneasy murmurs as attention shifted toward the growing cluster of uniforms. Monica straightened, the receipt now folded neatly between her fingers. She did not turn immediately. She did not rush. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the bags, her shoulders settling into place as if aligning herself with something only she could feel. When she finally lifted her gaze, it was not with surprise, nor fear, but with a quiet awareness, as though this moment, this exact arrangement of tension and expectation, had already played out in her mind long before it ever reached the surface of reality. Crowley stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the pavement toward her, long and sharp under the fading sun. His jaw tightened slightly, the corners of his mouth pulling into something that resembled authority but carried the weight of assumption. Around him, 9 other officers closed the distance, their presence pressing in like a tightening circle, each one feeding off the certainty of the others. To them, it was routine. Another stop, another situation to control, another person to remind exactly where they stood. What they could not see, what none of them even considered, was that Monica Hayes had already been waiting for them. Monica Hayes stood exactly where she was, grocery bags still hanging at her sides, as Sergeant Daniel Crowley closed the final few feet between them, his boots striking the pavement with a deliberate rhythm meant to establish control before a single word was spoken. He stopped just inside her personal space, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his uniform, close enough to make most people instinctively step back. Monica did not move. Crowley's eyes swept over her slowly, taking in the loose sweater, the simple shoes, the lack of any visible urgency or fear, and something about that stillness seemed to irritate him more than outright defiance ever could. "You mind telling me what you're doing out here?" he asked, his tone sharp, already loaded with accusation rather than curiosity. Monica met his gaze evenly. "I'm leaving the store," she replied, her voice calm, steady, unhurried. "I just finished shopping." A faint scoff slipped from one of the officers behind Crowley. Another shifted closer, the circle tightening by inches, their presence pressing in from all sides. Crowley tilted his head slightly, as though weighing her answer and finding it insufficient. "That's so," he muttered, glancing briefly at the bags in her hands before looking back at her face. "Because we've had reports. Suspicious activity. Someone matching your description." The words hung in the air, vague and convenient. Monica's fingers adjusted slightly around the plastic handles, the faint creak of stretched material the only sound she made. "What kind of activity?" she asked. Crowley's jaw flexed. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he took half a step closer, forcing the distance even tighter. "Don't play games," he said, his voice lowering, carrying a quiet threat. "You were seen moving around vehicles. Looking inside them. That sound familiar?" A lie, cleanly delivered. Monica did not blink. "No," she said simply. The response landed without emotion, without apology, and it struck something in Crowley that politeness would not have. Behind him, Officer Blake circled slightly to Monica's left, his boots scraping faintly against the asphalt as he positioned himself at an angle that blocked her path without making it obvious. Another officer moved in on her right. The perimeter closed further. "Here's what's going to happen," Crowley continued, his voice rising just enough for the nearby onlookers to hear, to establish a narrative before anyone could question it. "You're going to set those bags down nice and slow. Then you're going to show us some ID." Monica held his gaze for a long second. Then, without breaking eye contact, she lowered the bags carefully to the ground. The plastic rustled softly as they touched the pavement. Her movements were controlled, deliberate, giving them nothing to react to. She straightened again, her hands now visible at her sides. "My ID is in my purse," she said. Crowley's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you better reach for it real careful," he replied, his hand resting just a little too close to his belt, his posture stiffening with anticipation. Around them, the parking lot had grown quieter. Conversations faded. Engines idled. A few phones were raised at a distance, their lenses pointed toward the unfolding scene. Monica could feel the shift in attention, the weight of eyes watching, recording, waiting. But her expression did not change. Not a flicker of nerves. Not a trace of urgency. And that, more than anything, made Crowley's patience were thin. "You think this is a joke?" he snapped suddenly, stepping forward again, his voice sharper now, louder, drawing even more attention. "We ask questions, you answer. That's how this works." Monica's gaze did not waver. "I am answering," she said, her tone even, almost quiet against the rising tension. Crowley's nostrils flared slightly. Behind him, one of the officers muttered something under his breath, a low, dismissive comment that carried just enough edge to reveal what they had already decided about her. The circle tightened one more inch. The space around Monica shrank until it felt almost measured, almost intentional, like a boundary being drawn. To them, it was control. To her, it was confirmation. And still, she did not move. The space around Monica Hayes held steady for a moment, tight and deliberate, as if the officers expected her to fill it with panic, with excuses, with anything that would justify what they were preparing to do next. Instead, she remained exactly where she was, shoulders relaxed, chin level, her breathing slow, and even despite the growing pressure closing in from every direction. That quiet refusal to react settled over the scene like something unnatural, something that did not belong in a situation built entirely on intimidation. Sergeant Daniel Crowley exhaled sharply through his nose, his patience thinning in visible increments. He glanced briefly over his shoulder, catching the eyes of his team, and in that single look an unspoken agreement passed between them. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about control. "All right," Crowley said, his tone flattening into something colder, more rigid. "You're going to do exactly what I say, and you're going to do it now." Monica did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved once, calmly, taking in the positions of each officer, left, right, behind, the angles of their stance, the distance between them. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Officer Turner shift uneasily, as if he had been seeing more clearly than he was comfortable with. "I already told you," Monica said, her voice measured, each word placed carefully. "My ID is in my purse." Crowley's lips pressed tighter. "Then why are you standing there?" he snapped. "Reach for it." Monica's gaze flickered briefly toward the purse resting near her feet, then back to him. "You told me to move carefully," she replied. "I'm making sure you don't misunderstand anything." A low, irritated sound came from one of the officers. Another let out a short breath, the kind that carried impatience rather than amusement. Crowley stepped forward again, this time close enough that the front of his uniform nearly brushed her shoulder. "Don't get smart with me," he said, his voice dropping into something more dangerous, less controlled. "You don't get to set the pace here." Monica held his stare. There was no challenge in it, no aggression, just a steady presence that refused to shrink under his tone. That, more than any insult, pushed him further. "Go ahead," Crowley barked suddenly, louder now, projecting authority outward as much as inward. "Get your purse." Slowly, the command hung in the air. Monica bent just enough to reach for the strap, her movements precise, unhurried, her hands visible the entire time. The soft scrape of leather against asphalt sounded louder than it should have. She lifted the purse and held it at her side, waiting. Not rushing, not fumbling. Waiting. Crowley's jaw tightened again. "Open it," he ordered. Monica paused, just for a fraction of a second, then unzipped the top. The sound cut clean through the quiet. Inside, nothing immediately visible, just the ordinary clutter of a personal bag. But Crowley did not even look. He was already stepping past procedure, already leaning into assumption. "Dump it," he said. The word landed hard. Around them, a few more bystanders had stopped entirely now, their attention fixed, phones raised higher. The atmosphere had shifted from curiosity to something heavier, something that carried the weight of knowing this was no longer routine. Monica's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the purse. She did not move to comply. Instead, she looked back at Crowley, her expression unchanged, her voice calm enough to contrast sharply against his rising aggression. "Is that necessary?" she asked. The question was simple. It should have been simple. But in the tightening circle of authority and ego, it landed like defiance. Crowley's face hardened, the muscles in his jaw flexing visibly. "I don't repeat myself," he said, his tone now stripped of any pretense. "Dump the bag, or we will do it for you." Behind him, one of the officers took a step closer, hands already lifting slightly, ready to intervene, ready to escalate. The circle drew in tighter still, the invisible line around Monica, shrinking to almost nothing. And still, she did not rush. She did not argue. She simply stood there, holding the purse, as if measuring something far more important than their voices. Monica Hayes held the purse steady in her hand, the zipper half open, her fingers resting lightly against the edge, as if the decision in front of her carried weight far beyond the simple act they were demanding. The silence stretched just long enough to irritate Sergeant Daniel Crowley beyond restraint. "That's it," he snapped, his voice cutting sharply through the air. "I'm done asking." His hand shot forward without warning, gripping the strap of her purse and yanking it from her grasp with a sudden, forceful pull. The motion was aggressive, unnecessary, meant to assert dominance rather than procedure. The bag slipped from Monica's hand, the leather twisting as Crowley tore it free. Without hesitation, he turned and dumped its contents onto the pavement. Items scattered across the asphalt, keys clattering, a wallet sliding, a small notebook flipping open as it hit the ground. The sound drew even more attention, a sharp disruption in the otherwise controlled tension of the scene. "Let's see what you're hiding," Crowley muttered, already crouching, his movements quick and invasive. Monica did not reach for anything. She did not protest. She simply watched, her posture unchanged, her expression unreadable. That calmness only fueled the others. Officer Blake stepped in closer, his shoulder brushing against Monica's arm as he leaned past her, scanning the ground like he expected something incriminating to appear out of thin air. "Looks like a whole lot of nothing," he said, though his tone carried irritation rather than relief. "Give it a second," another officer added, his voice edged with anticipation. "They always got something." Crowley's hands moved faster now, rifling through the scattered items, flipping open the wallet, checking compartments, shaking the notebook as if evidence might fall out. Nothing. The absence of anything suspicious did not slow him down. It only sharpened his frustration. He stood abruptly, turning back toward Monica, his face tightening. "Turn around," he ordered. Monica met his gaze. "For what reason?" she asked, her voice steady, not raised, not confrontational, just precise. That single question snapped whatever restraint Crowley had left. "For officer's safety," he barked, stepping forward again, his presence now openly aggressive. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The words were no longer a request. Behind him, the other officers shifted into motion, their positions tightening into something more coordinated, more forceful. The atmosphere shifted again, this time unmistakably. What had been intimidation was now crossing into action. Monica did not move immediately. Her eyes moved once more, briefly, calmly, noting the positions closing in around her. Then, without resistance, she turned. Slowly, deliberately. Her hands came behind her back, fingers relaxed, offering no struggle, no excuse. That should have de-escalated the moment. It did not. Crowley grabbed her wrist harder than necessary, twisting it slightly as he pulled her arms upward. The force caused her shoulders to tense, her body shifting just enough to absorb the pressure. Another officer stepped in, taking her other arm, their grip firm, excessive. "Stop resisting," one of them said loudly, though she had not resisted at all. The phrase hung in the air, rehearsed, preemptive, a justification spoken before it was needed. Monica's feet adjusted slightly on the pavement to keep her balance as the force on her arms increased. Her breathing remained steady. Her expression did not crack. Around them, the watching crowd had grown still, phones raised higher now, capturing every second. Crowley leaned closer, his voice low, meant only for her. "You should have just cooperated," he muttered, the edge in his tone revealing something personal, something beyond procedure. Monica did not respond. She simply stood there, controlled, composed, as 10 officers tightened their grip around her, unaware that every move they made was falling exactly into place. The pressure on Monica Hayes's arms did not ease. It increased, inch by inch, as if each officer needed to prove their control to the others. Sergeant Daniel Crowley tightened his grip and gave a sharp nod, and that single motion set everything into motion at once. "Take her down," he ordered. There was no hesitation. 2 officers shifted their stance, one stepping behind her legs while another drove forward at her shoulder. The movement was abrupt, coordinated, excessive for someone who had not resisted for a single second. Monica's balance broke as her knees buckled under the sudden force, her body guided, no forced, down toward the asphalt. The impact was controlled but rough, her weight meeting the pavement with a heavy thud that echoed louder than it should have in the tense silence. "Stop resisting," one officer shouted again, louder this time, projecting for the crowd, for the cameras, for the narrative they were building in real time. Monica's hands remained exactly where they had been placed, her fingers relaxed, her body still except for the natural adjustment to the pressure being applied to her back and shoulders. "I am not resisting," she said, her voice steady even from the ground, each word clear despite the position they had forced her into. Crowley crouched beside her, one knee pressing near her side, his presence looming, his breathing slightly heavier now, not from exertion, but from something sharper, something edged with frustration that she had not given him what he wanted. "You're not in charge here," he muttered under his breath, his voice tight, almost strained. Behind him, another officer snapped the cuffs around her wrists, the metal closing with a decisive finality. The grip on her arms did not release even after the cuffs were secured. Instead, they pulled her wrists higher than necessary, forcing her shoulders into an uncomfortable angle meant to keep her compliant, to remind her who held control. Around them, The parking lot had gone nearly silent, except for the low murmur of distant voices and the faint electronic hum of phones recording. A car door slammed somewhere far off, the sound sharp against the stillness. Officer Blake stepped forward, scanning the scattered contents of Monica's purse again, as if searching for something, anything, that could justify what had already been done. "We've got grounds," he said, though his tone carried uncertainty beneath the surface confidence. "Suspicious behavior, failure to comply." He trailed off, glancing at Crowley for confirmation. Crowley stood slowly, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched tight. "We'll sort it out at the station," he said flatly, his voice loud enough now to reclaim control of the scene. "Get her up." Two officers grabbed Monica under her arms, lifting her from the pavement with firm, unyielding force. Her feet found the ground again, her posture straightening despite the tension in her shoulders, despite the cuffs pulling her arms tight behind her back. Her breathing remained even, her gaze forward. Not once did she struggle. Not once did she raise her voice. The composure lingered in the air like something out of place, something that did not belong in the chaos they were creating. One of the younger officers shifted uneasily, glancing toward the crowd, toward the phones still pointed at them. "We should clear this out," he muttered, but his voice lacked the authority to change anything. Crowley ignored him. Instead, he stepped closer to Monica again, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face, searching for a crack, for fear, for anger, anything he could push against. He found nothing, and that absence unsettled him more than he was willing to admit. "You made this harder than it had to be," he said, his tone low, controlled, but carrying a sharp edge beneath it. Monica finally turned her head slightly, just enough for her voice to reach him clearly. "No," she replied, calm and precise. "You did." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. And for the briefest moment, something flickered in Crowley's expression. Not doubt, not yet, but something close enough to it that it passed through him before he could shut it down. Around them, 10 officers stood convinced they had just asserted their authority. None of them realized they had just crossed a line they could not step back from. The tension did not break after the cuffs clicked into place. It settled, heavy and expectant, like something waiting for a final command. Monica Hayes stood upright between two officers, her hands secure behind her back, her shoulders held tight by their grip, yet her posture remained steady, almost composed in a way that did not match the scene around her. Sergeant Daniel Crowley took a slow step back, adjusting his stance as if reclaiming the center of control. He rolled his shoulders once, exhaling through his nose, then gestured sharply toward one of the cruisers. "We're done here," he said, his voice carrying across the lot. "Get her in the car. We'll process everything at the station." The words came with the weight of finality, as if the outcome had already been decided, written, and sealed. Officer Blake moved first, tightening his grip on Monica's arm. "Let's go," he muttered, tugging forward with enough force to prompt movement. Monica's feet shifted, but not because she was being dragged, because she chose to step. Each movement remained controlled, deliberate, as though she refused to let even this moment be dictated entirely by them. The crowd remained at a distance, phones still raised, the quiet hum of recording devices filling the spaces between voices. Crowley turned slightly, already speaking into his radio, his tone clipped, professional on the surface, but beneath it lingered. That same impatience, that same need to assert dominance over what he had already labeled as a routine arrest. "One female in custody," he reported. "Possible theft, non-compliant, escalating behavior." The words came easily, shaped to justify everything that had already happened. Monica's gaze lifted slightly as she walked, not toward the officers, not toward the crowd, but towards something beyond them. Then, quietly, without raising her voice, she spoke. "Sergeant Crowley." The use of his name, clear, precise, cut through the movement. He stopped, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. He turned his head back toward her, his expression tightening. "What?" he snapped, irritation flaring at the interruption. Monica's eyes met his, steady, unwavering. You should stop, she said. The words were calm, almost gentle, but they carried something beneath them, something measured, something final. Crowley let out a short, disbelieving breath, the corner of his mouth twitching into a sharp, humorless grin. Stop, he echoed, stepping closer again, his voice lowering as if the word itself offended him. You don't get to tell me what to do. Monica did not react to his tone. This is your last chance, she continued, her voice just as steady as before. Call off. Right now. A few of the officers exchanged quick glances, subtle, uncertain. The way she said it, the certainty, the lack of fear, did not fit the situation they believed they controlled. Crowley noticed, and it irritated him more than anything else. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, edged with quiet mockery. Or what? He asked. Monica held his gaze for one long, unbroken second. Were you going to wish you had? She replied. No threat, no raised voice, just a statement, delivered with absolute clarity. Crowley stared at her, searching for something behind the words, bluff, desperation, anything he could dismiss. What he found instead was composure, stillness, certainty, and that was enough to make him scoff, a low, dismissive sound that cut through whatever hesitation might have existed. He straightened, shaking his head as if brushing off something trivial. Yeah, he said, louder now for everyone to hear. I'm real scared. A few officers chuckled under their breath, the tension breaking just enough for arrogance to fill the space again. Crowley gestured sharply toward the cruiser. Put her in the back, he ordered, and make it quick. The last chance pass dismissed. With a flick of his hand. And in that moment, without realizing it, Sergeant Daniel Crowley made the decision that would define everything that came next. Two officers began guiding Monica Hayes toward the cruiser, their hands firm on her arms, their movements efficient, rehearsed, confident in an outcome they believed was already secured. The rear door of the vehicle swung open with a dull, mechanical creak, the dark interior waiting. Sergeant Daniel Crowley turned slightly away, already disengaging, his attention drifting back toward his radio, toward paperwork, toward the routine conclusion he expected. And then it happened. A voice, sharp, authoritative, and unmistakably controlled, cut across the parking lot. That's far enough. It did not rise. It did not shout, but it carried. Every movement stopped. The officers holding Monica froze mid-step, their grips tightening instinctively before loosening again, uncertainty slipping in where certainty had been. Crowley's head snapped toward the sound. 3 unmarked black SUVs had pulled in without anyone noticing when. Their doors opened almost in unison, and men and women in dark suits stepped out with a precision that did not belong to local patrol. Their posture was different, grounded, deliberate, carrying a kind of authority that did not need to be announced. One of them, a tall man with a calm but unyielding presence, walked forward, his gaze locking directly onto Crowley. Release her, he said. No badge was flashed yet. No explanation offered. Just a command. Crowley blinked once, his expression tightening, confusion flickering across his face before instinct tried to reassert control. This is an active arrest, he said, his voice louder than necessary, trying to reclaim ground that was already shifting beneath him. You need to release her, the man repeated, this time slower, each word carrying weight. Behind him, more agents spread out, their presence quiet but absolute. The officers surrounding Monica hesitated. One of them looked toward Crowley, waiting for direction, but for the first time, Crowley did not move immediately. Something in the air had changed. Something undeniable. Monica stood between them, still cuffed, still composed, her breathing steady as ever. Then, without turning her head, she spoke. You're late, she said calmly. The tall man's expression softened just slightly. Traffic, he replied. And that was enough. Crowley's stomach dropped. His eyes snapped back to Monica, really looking at her now, not as a suspect, not as a problem to control, but as something else entirely, something he had missed. What is this? He demanded, but the sharpness in his voice had dulled, replaced by something uncertain, something edged with the first trace of realization. The agent reached into his jacket and produced a badge, holding it up just long enough for it to be seen clearly. Federal Internal Affairs Task Force. The words landed heavier than any shouted command. Around them, the circle of officers broke, not physically, but in posture and presence. The grip on Monica's arms loosened immediately. One of the officers stepped back entirely, his hand dropping away as if the contact itself had become a mistake he needed to undo. "Remove the cuffs," the agent said. "No hesitation now." The officer behind Monica fumbled slightly with the key, his fingers no longer steady, the small click of the mechanism suddenly sounding louder than before. The metal loosened, then released, and Monica brought her arms forward slowly, rolling her shoulders once, calmly, as if the restraint had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Crowley stood frozen, his mind racing, piecing together fragments that refused to align into anything good. "You said theft," the agent continued, his gaze never leaving Crowley. "Suspicious activity. Non-compliance." Each phrase was repeated back with a precision that stripped them of authority and exposed them for what they were. Crowley opened his mouth, but no words came out, because now he saw it. The composure, the timing, the warning he had dismissed. Monica turned slightly, finally facing him fully, her eyes steady, her expression unchanged, but now, unmistakably, in control. "I told you to stop," she said quietly. The weight of those words settled in, and for the first time since the moment he stepped out of his cruiser, Sergeant Daniel Crowley understood exactly what he had done, and exactly who he had done it to. The silence that followed Monica Hayes' final words did not break. It deepened, pressing down on the parking lot with a weight that none of the officers could ignore anymore. Sergeant Daniel Crowley stood frozen, his posture stiff, his mind struggling to catch up with a reality that had shifted without his permission. The tall federal agent stepped closer, his presence steady, controlled, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Sergeant Daniel Crowley," he said, his voice measured, carrying across the now silent crowd. "You and your unit are being detained pending investigation for excessive use of force, unlawful detention, and violation of civil rights." The words landed clean, precise, each one stripping away the authority Crowley had worn so confidently just minutes ago. A flicker of disbelief crossed Crowley's face. That's not," he started, but the sentence collapsed under its own weight. He looked around, searching for support, for someone to anchor him back into control, but what he found instead were his own officers stepping back, their shoulders no longer squared, their stance no longer unified. The formation that had once surrounded Monica was gone. In its place stood uncertainty. "Turn around," the agent instructed. No raised voice, no aggression, just inevitability. Crowley hesitated. For a fraction of a second, his body resisted. Not physically, but internally, as if the command itself did not fit the world he believed he controlled. Then another agent stepped forward, and the hesitation broke. Slowly, stiffly, Crowley turned. The sound of metal closing around his wrists followed. Firm, unmistakable, final. It echoed louder than it had when Monica had been cuffed. Around him, the same process repeated. One by one, the officers who had stood in dominance moments ago were separated, their hands guided behind their backs, their movements no longer commanding but compliant. Officer Blake avoided eye contact entirely, his gaze fixed on the ground as the cuffs secured around his wrists. Another officer muttered something under his breath, a weak protest that dissolved before it reached the air. The crowd watched in silence, phones still raised, but now capturing something entirely different. Not control, not intimidation, consequence. Monica stood off to the side now, her posture unchanged, her presence steady as ever. One of the agents approached her briefly, speaking in a low voice, but she simply nodded once, her attention returning to the scene unfolding in front of her. Crowley turned his head slightly, just enough to see her again. The realization had fully settled now, heavy and undeniable. Every command he had given, every assumption he had made, Every line he had crossed. They were no longer just actions. They were evidence. "You set this up," he said quietly, the words no longer sharp, no longer accusing, but hollow, stripped of power. Monica met his gaze. "No," she replied, her voice calm, grounded. "You walked into it." The distinction mattered, and he understood it now. The agents began escorting the officers toward the unmarked vehicles, their movements controlled, efficient, leaving no space for resistance. Crowley took a step forward under their guidance, his shoulders no longer squared, his presence diminished in a way that could not be reversed. The parking lot, once tense with false authority, now stood as something else entirely, a place where that authority had been exposed, dismantled, and taken away. And as the doors of the vehicles closed one by one, the final image left behind was not of force, but of justice, quiet and absolute, settling exactly where it had always been meant to land. The last of the unmarked vehicles pulled away from the Brookside Plaza parking lot with a low, controlled hum, their dark silhouettes disappearing into the late afternoon light as quietly as they had arrived. The tension that had once gripped the space unraveled slowly, like a tight knot finally loosened, leaving behind something softer, something steadier. Conversations resumed in cautious murmurs. A shopping cart rolled lazily across the asphalt, nudged by a passing breeze, its hollow rattle no longer drowned out by raised voices or sharp commands. The ordinary world, paused for a moment under the weight of injustice, began to move again. Monica Hayes remained where she stood for a few seconds longer, her gaze following the direction the vehicles had gone, her expression unchanged, composed, grounded. One of the federal agents approached her, offering a small nod of acknowledgement rather than words. It was not a gesture of authority, but of respect, quiet, earned, understood without explanation. Monica returned the nod once, her movements as deliberate as they had been from the beginning. She turned then, her attention shifting back to the ground where her belongings had been scattered earlier. The items had been gathered neatly by one of the agents, placed back in her purse with care that stood in stark contrast to how they had been handled before. Monica bent slightly, picking up the bag, her fingers brushing against the worn leather strap. She checked its contents briefly, not out of worry, but out of habit, then closed it with a soft, final zip. Around her, a few of the bystanders lowered their phones, their expressions no longer uncertain but thoughtful, some even respectful. One woman offered a quiet, almost hesitant smile. A man gave a small nod, the kind that carried acknowledgement rather than curiosity. No one stepped forward. No one interrupted. The moment did not call for applause or noise. It called for understanding. Monica adjusted the strap of her purse over her shoulder and walked back toward the grocery bags she had set down earlier. They remained where she had left them, untouched, grounded in the same calm reality she had never allowed to slip away. She picked them up, one in each hand, the weight familiar, manageable. Her posture settled naturally, her breathing steady, as if the events of the past minutes had been nothing more than a brief disruption in an otherwise ordinary day. The sun had dipped slightly lower now, casting longer shadows across the lot, softening the edges of everything it touched. The harshness that had filled the space earlier had faded, replaced by something quieter, something balanced. Monica walked toward her car at the far end of the row, her steps unhurried, her presence no longer surrounded but respected. There was no need to look back. The lesson had already been delivered. The truth had already been seen. And as she reached her car, setting the groceries carefully inside before closing the door with a gentle, controlled motion, the world continued on, not unchanged but corrected. Justice had not come loudly. It had not needed to. It had arrived exactly when it was supposed to, through patience, through precision, through the quiet strength of someone who never needed to raise her voice to be heard. Monica slid into the driver's seat, paused for a brief moment with her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, then started the engine. The soft purr of the car blended into the rhythm of the evening, and as she pulled out of the parking space and drove away, the scene behind her settled fully into stillness. carrying with it the quiet certainty that what had happened there would not be forgotten, but more importantly, would not be repeated.